Welcome to the Love of the Star podcast. I am Bobby Belt, Dallas Cowboys insider for 105.3 The Fan in Dallas, joined as always by former Super Bowl winning NFL scout Brian Broaddus. He is now the co-host of the G-Bag Nation, 2 to 7 p.m. Central, Monday through Friday. That is also on 105.3 The Fan. And he is the pre- and post-game co-host on the Dallas Cowboys radio network. Brian, how you doing, man?
I'm doing well, and you're hearing the voice of Bobby Belt, also of 105.3 The Fan. Man of Love of the Star podcast, man of Insider, Cowboy Insider for 105.3 The Fan. What job do you not have as well, Bobby? That's kind of what we're working on. But hey, it's we're kind of into full off-season mode now, and
We are.
With the Super Bowl in the rearview mirror, we're going to probably cover a lot of ground these next several weeks about tags, about combines, about the draft. This is honestly my favorite time of the year. If a guy told me a long time ago working in the NFL, he said, listen, this would be a great gig if we didn't have to play games. If we didn't have to if we could just sign players and draft players and kind of okay, whose roster looks better on paper, but they make you play games. But like I said, this is my favorite time of the year with the draft, pro days, and combine, everything on the horizon.
Now, I know before we jump into Cowboys talk here just really quickly, I know that we had a number of people, especially on the YouTube, in the comments there on the YouTube, that were feeling for you with your bad luck with the car. Do we have any Brian Broaddus car updates after the hit and run?
Yeah, I was on the phone this morning. I had to go to my cardiologist. When you get old, you have to go to a heart doctor. So now I'm doing the cardiologist thing. So on the way to the cardiologist, I had to visit with a very cheerful, bright young lady with Allstate. We walked through all kinds of options and what was going on and how this all happened. I miss my Nissan Rogue because I'm driving a Nissan Versa right now. The Versa is a little smaller, but
yeah, I can't imagine you in a Versa. That would be very small.
Yeah, it's very small. I miss my Rogue, but everybody, like I said, it's unfortunate out there that you go through situations where, these, hit and runs and stuff like that. I mean, thank God my phone had a camera and took a picture, but Allstate's been great. I'm not. It's not trying to endorse Allstate here, but if they want to come on board with Love of the Star, we'd love to have them. But
absolutely.
But they've done a really, really nice job of handling this thing in a kind of a difficult time. I went from getting my truck stolen to getting a new car, now to getting my new car hit. It's never easy, but I think there's a lot of people out there that are far worse off than me, and my prayers are for you guys every single day.
Well, good that you've got the cheery disposition. I think I'd be much more surly than you, Brian, personally.
Yeah, I'm good.
But you always turn around. All right, let's talk about these Cowboys. And specifically, next segment, we're going to dive a little bit into some of the considerations at 26, particularly corner.
Yeah.
So we'll dive into some of that. Like we've told you guys before, we're going to do a lot of draft conversation just from the work Brian and I do with DallasCowboys.com and in researching some of these players. But, Brian, let's kick off first with before they get to the draft, there will be some questions about extensions and questions about, do they want to pay guys now? Do they want to wait in offseason? And I think the four names that really stand out here are CeeDee Lamb and Trayvon Diggs, who are eligible for contract extensions this offseason. Terrence Steele, who, though he's a free agent, he's a restricted free agent, which means, in essence, the Cowboys have complete control over him. If they want to keep him, they can. And so because of that, it sort of functions like an extension if you get it done. And then the other one is Dak Prescott. And the questions that surround getting his deal extended, or if you'd rather not touch that, or if you're going to touch it, you'd rather restructure than extend. And so we're going to dive into all these topics. Let's talk about the young guys first who are coming into their earliest eligibility. The one I think may be the easiest one to get done, and that's CeeDee Lamb. I think Lamb and Steele are going to be two guys that I would expect. I'd be surprised if we get to training camp and Lamb and Steele don't have new deals. But specifically with Lamb, let's talk about him first. Brian, do you anticipate any sort of hiccups there? Do you think the Cowboys have said, or I should say this, do you anticipate the Cowboys at all saying, let's put it off another year? Or do you think they'd like to say, let's get ahead of it now. We have 2 years of control, which means if we extend it, we can kind of finagle the numbers a little bit better, a little bit easier. Let's make sure we just get this done now.
Yeah, and I'll put the question back to you because I think you got a really good handle of this Lamb one because of his agent and the conversations that you and I were talking about, that the deals that this agent has structured before, that they have some parameters that they kind of understand how this works. And so I'll let you better explain that. You're right about it. I think that the Cowboys, if I can say one thing, Bobby, the Cowboys need to get back to getting on these deals earlier and not waiting and not, they have the 5th-year option with Lamb. They don't have the 5th-year option with Diggs. So maybe Diggs is a little bit more pressing for him right now. But there was a time and place where the Cowboys did a really nice job of staying ahead of and getting contracts done before they got out of hand. They lost their way a little bit with Dak Prescott. And, what happened with Dak, instead of being possibly a $28 million, and I hope I'm not speaking out of turn here, but, maybe a $28 to $30 million contract turns into well over $40 million a year by not being very proactive. Now, Dak's agent wasn't going to give you a lot of latitude there. There were a lot of conversations. The agent changed agencies. There was talk about him carrying several of his players that were on tags to the new agency. That might have presented some problems for him. So there were a lot of things that they dealt with the Prescott. But the bottom line here is they need to get back to that approach where identify early and try and get stuff done early. Now, you also, though, have a little bit of a history here where these players now say, well, if you just hold Dallas up, you'll end up getting more money. I don't know if that's fair or not, but
it's probably their reputation with some people.
It is. It's like Dallas will cave. And, I have the utmost respect for Stephen Jones and Adam Pacifica and Todd Williams and those guys that do contracts, but they have to feel like, they need to do a little bit better job of staggering these contracts so they're not all falling at the same time. That could be a problem. But I feel like the thing with with Steele is interesting because that's a tender, right? Is that first round tender, second round tender?
So you can tender Terrence Steele, basically a first round tender, which is a fixed salary amount and a compensation amount. So that if some team wanted to come in and sign Terrence Steele, the Cowboys would either get to match it or take the first round draft pick. I would imagine they'll give him a first round tender. And they can work out a new deal if they like. They can get him signed up for a new deal. And we'll dive into the Steele numbers here in a sec. The parameters on the Lamb deal
go through the Lamb thing because I know you have some thoughts about that one.
So to me, when you look at who's the closest receiver that Lamb mirrored the first 2 years of his career, it was Terry McLaurin.
Yeah.
And McLaurin and Lamb had stunningly similar numbers through the first 2 years of their career. I mean, I think it was like the exact same amount of yards. It was like a catch off. It was the same touchdowns. It was the same player. Lamb, his third year, performed at a much higher level than McLaurin did before McLaurin got his extension, which was 3 years, $68.3 million. So we're talking about 22.7 annually for McLaurin. Very easy for Lamb's representatives to point at that and go, he needs more than that. The two deals this past offseason that CeeDee Lamb's agent negotiated, Tory Dandy at CAA, one of the best agents around, he had negotiated Deebo Samuel, and then more specifically, probably more relevant to this discussion, A.J. Brown. And Deebo Samuel got done at $23.85 million annually over 3 years. So 3 years, $71 million. A.J. Brown got 4 years, $100. And so that's $25 million annually. To me, I think it's pretty clear. And then when you consider the salary cap growth, the fact that the cap went up another $16 million this year, I think it's very easy to see that you take the parameters of Samuel, Brown, Obviously, you can compare. Here's what McLaurin got. Lamb outperformed McLaurin third year before the contract deal, so we need to go above that. I think it's very easy to potentially see them coming to the table and saying 4 years, $104 million, $26 million annually, $1 million up from where A.J. Brown, who's in the same division, just signed because we got cap increases here. But 4 years, $104 million. And when you tack that on to CeeDee Lamb's final 2 years of his contract, you can lessen that burden. It essentially becomes, I'll tell you right now, with 4 years and $104 million, his current contract would be 2 years, $21 million, if you include the fifth-year option. So that becomes essentially a 6-year, $125 million deal.
Yeah.
And I think everybody generally okay with that?
Yeah, I mean, to me, the thing that you've seen from CeeDee Lamb is that once he became the number one receiver, that his production elevated, his game elevated to that level where you would be comfortable paying him that. You really would, as compared to, and the guys that you are comparing him to are outstanding receivers in their own right. So I don't have a problem with his contract at all.
So I think that's one that it's really easy to just see where the market is, where CD fits into that market, some of those things. So that's, to me, why I think Lamb is probably the easiest deal to get done, is just because I think it's clear from everybody's sides. All right, this is who he is. This is what he's worth. It's very easy to just slot this in. I don't feel like this one should be pulling teeth the way some of their recent negotiations have. The other question here, we just mentioned there, Terrence Steele. And when you look at the breakdown of the top right tackles in the game, which is what Terrence Steele would be, he's a right tackle, and they generally still, it's not so much how much are tackles paid, it's more right versus left. Left tackles still generally get paid a lot more than the right tackles do across the league. But when you look at the top rankings, number 9 on the highest paid right tackles annually is La'el Collins. Yeah. So it's very easy to say, well, you picked us over him. He's getting paid above him. Yeah. And I think when you take a look at it, is it that unreal, Brian, considering La'el Collins is 9th, is it that unrealistic for Terrence Steele to say, I want to be like the 5th or 6th best paid right tackle in the NFL?
I don't think it's unrealistic because, and this is what's amazing to me, is the Cowboys running game fell off when he went out. When he was gone, all of a sudden, and I'm one of these guys, Bobby, as you know, from doing the show with me and working with me on 105.3, The Fan, I felt like that Tyron Smith coming in would give them a boost at that right tackle spot.
Yeah.
It really didn't work out that way. He was good, but he wasn't Terrence Steele good. And so I'm interested to see, with now Mike Solari being the offensive line coach, what he thinks of Terrence Steele. And because Joe Philbin thought he hung the moon. He clearly liked Terrence Steele more than he liked La'el Collins, going forward. And so I'm interested in the whispers that we hear coming out of the Star and maybe even at the Combine of how do they have these young tackles ranked? Terrence Steele clearly better than Tyler Smith. Is it just way above, or do you feel Tyler Smith's better? The tender and what they tender him will be fascinating, and I think it'll tell you a lot about what Mike Solari, Will McClay. I think the scouts and Will and Jared Stephen have a high regard for Terrence Steele. I'm interested to see new offensive line coach Mike Solari and what his opinion is of him.
So I think there's a motivation to get Steele done, though, because and I think there would be a motivation from Steele not to wait it out, because you are a restricted free agent, so you can get the first round tender. I don't remember how much that is. I think it's been somewhere around like $3.5–4 million in the past. I don't know where that's at today, but you're talking about leaving a lot of money on the table if you just go, well, let's play hardball and wait this out a little bit. I think it'd be in Terrence Steele's best interest to get paid now and take advantage of his career earnings while he can. A lot of times you'll see the Cowboys did this with Lyle Collins. You'll hit them with a 3-year extension around this time with some of the restricted free agents. So, Brian, if we're looking at 5th to 6th highest paid right tackle, that would be about $15 million a year. So Terrence Steele, 3 years, $45 million. That's about $1 million more than you paid for Zach Martin about 5-6 years ago. So not a ridiculous amount of inflation. Obviously, Zach Martin was the top of the guard market. So to get I think fairly, you can fairly call him a top 10 right tackle in the NFL now. I don't have a problem with, $15 million annually.
I'll tell you what, if we'd had this discussion 365 days ago, I would have called you the biggest idiot ever.
You would have.
I'm the idiot for not seeing this kid develop the way he did. Joe Philbin had a plan about him. Joe Philbin said he was first in, last to leave. He worked hard. He was dedicated. He wanted to learn. There's still some things about him that you go, man, that guy, maybe he lacks a little power, maybe he lacks a little strength, but there's things that make up for that he does. I just feel like, though, at right tackle, that's a tough one for me, Bobby, just because I've got this in my mind, about the player, but he's better than what I think. And, is he still going to be deficient in areas? Yeah, I think so. But is he better than a lot of these right tackles in the league? Sure, absolutely. So if you put him somewhere in the top 6, I feel like you probably got him in the right spot.
So that's one question there. The other question that still needs to be asked, and I've hit on these 4, I think we'll save for later this week. We'll save the Dak and Diggs discussions just because we've already gone a little long talking about these 2. But the third question, and maybe we decide to include him on Friday, would you engage at all in extension negotiations or discussions with Tyler Biotish?
Yeah, that's a tough position to find. I feel like that there's a couple of centers in this draft. But, here's another guy that you drafted, you developed. He was a guy that really Joe Philbin kind of brought along. His awareness improved. His overall play improved. He wasn't a liability against those heavy noses. Second level play was good. I totally have the confidence in him. The problem is, you're looking at a situation where you're going to go back to paying all these offensive linemen again, and maybe with the way that the Cowboys evaluate offensive linemen. Now we'll see about with Ball and Let's Go and guys like that. But man, these first round linemen, every time they tab one, they seem to hit. And, maybe it's going to be a point in time where they're going to okay, we can't pay all these guys, but if we keep drafting offensive linemen at 26, 27, maybe that's the best route to go, and just keep trying to hope that you have the seasons, and, we'll figure out the offensive line's always going to kind of be a first round selection late in the draft. And then we'll work on the other positions going from there, because they just can't pay all these guys.
Well, we'll have to dive in this a little bit more, because you still got to remember you're potentially shelling out $30 million plus per year for Micah Parsons next offseason. And so a lot of questions for the Cowboys to answer on their salary cap ledger. You're listening to the Love of the Star podcast. The Love of the Star is an Odyssey podcast. You can find it on the Odyssey app or wherever you get your podcasts. All right, Brian, we have it's draft season. We've talked about that. But I wanted to bring to you as we begin this conversation about 26, because this may be able to help us figure out who may be available at 26, and then we'll talk about some of the names. Daniel Jeremiah's first mock draft is out.
Okay.
And so I'm gonna run through it really quickly for you, and then we'll get an idea of who.
Well, do this for me then.
Yep.
Tell me who the Cowboys are going to pick, who he picked, and then give me the players after they were selected.
Okay, great. Let me scroll down here. I will say this one's interesting to me. DJ does have Tyree Wilson, the edge from Texas Tech, going ahead of Will Anderson.
It's on my board that way.
He's a great player.
Yeah, if you look at a screenshot right now of my draft board, Wilson, Anderson, Murphy, I know that there's people that's talking about Nolan Smith, it being a guy involved that could be right in that mix. But on my draft board as it sits, I have Wilson over Anderson and then Murphy as all three of those guys at Wilson, Texas Tech, Anderson, Alabama, Murphy, Clemson. All three of those guys have first round grades on.
So the pick for the Cowboys, I'll give you the couple picks right before him. 23, the Vikings take Deonte Banks, cornerback, Maryland.
Man, that was the guy I was talking about potentially being. I mean, I have 21st round grades, and I'm going to say him or Smith and Jigba from Ohio State would probably be the 21st player on my board. Banks going at that spot ahead, I think that would hurt the Cowboys.
24, Brian Breezy, the Clemson defensive tackle.
Okay, I struggle with this guy a lot. And, people tell me you watch the North Carolina game and you get a little bit better feel on him. As a 3 technique guy, I'm a little bit kind of wait and see. I wouldn't particularly like him as a pick for the Cowboys. I'd be glad if he would go ahead of me.
25, the New York Giants take Jalen Hyatt, receiver from Tennessee.
Yeah, well, I've got Addison from USC, Hyatt from Tennessee, and Johnston from TCU as my first 3 players in the first round. So Hyatt, the Giants need weapons, and Hyatt is a weapon. He's a tall, linear, thin type player, but he's going to run really, really fast. He catches all the balls thrown at him. So, and he plays in an offense that is really high tempo. He can run all day. The Giants need weapons. This kid is clearly a weapon.
All right. So at pick 26, this is the first time I've seen this name mocked to the Cowboys at all. And we're still very early in the process, of course. The Dallas Cowboys with the 26th pick in Daniel Jeremiah's mock draft, Brian, they take Georgia Tech edge rusher Keon White.
Yeah, Keon White, I think to me that I struggle a little bit with Keon White. And I know there's a lot of people that don't. I know that Dane Brugler really, really thinks the world of the player. My initial thought of him wasn't as positive as what some of these other guys. And again, I think you have to do your own work on these players. But it's a kid that was a transfer from Old Dominion. And so you're talking about a 6'5". The measurables I'm working off right now, and I don't remember him being a Senior Bowl guy or something like that. So his height and weight could be completely different. But what I was working off of was 6'5", 286. And I think this guy plays with a lot more effort and toughness than he does athletic ability. I mean, you don't see him come flying off the ball, but he's more of a power pusher. He tries to bully the blocker, and there's several snaps where he really gets away with it. He'd be a hard guy to deal with as a pass rusher when he wants to walk the blocker back into the quarterback. I just don't see a really wide range of pass rush moves. But when he gets in position, this guy can finish. So he does make his share of tackles near or behind the line of scrimmage. I thought he had a really good nose for the ball. It's a hard guy to fool. But man, that to me, when you start to that was a player that I didn't see as one of those guys as one of my 20. And then I'm kind of on the verge of where he is as a 2 and maybe a 3 but he's got the size. I just don't know. He looks kind of like he's got a build like he's a 3-4 defensive end at 6'5" and 286.
I think the player at edge who goes with the final pick of the first round in this mock draft is one you'd probably prefer. So let's run through the picks that happen immediately after that in Daniel Jeremiah's mock draft. 27 of the Bills, Osiris Torrance, guard from Florida, a guy to Dallas.
Yeah, that's one of those guys. And I think as Torrance's weight comes down, he was a 347 guy. 337. If he could get that thing in the 320 range, this guy is a powerful football player. I mean, he is super, super, super strong. I don't think he's a very quick-footed guy. And so I say that I think there's some limited range, but if you're talking about just playing with power, this guy can handle all that. So I understand why he's being selected in this area.
I think I'd like somebody who's not going to be so heavy-footed getting to the second level. It looks like cement shoes at times. I mean, he's powerful. That's great.
Yeah.
I think being able to get up to the second level is going to be a problem for him. Pick 28 to the Bengals, Michael Mayer, the tight end from Notre Dame.
Okay, now if you gave me a choice between Mayer and Torrance and then also White, Mayer is one of my 20 first-round grades. So he's in the mix. So you have the other ones are more second and third round guys. Mayer would be a guy that I would have. He would be one. I have 20 names. Mayer would be one of those guys.
Pick 29 to the New Orleans Saints. I know a guy you like a lot. Wide receiver Zay Flowers, Boston College.
Yeah, Zay Flowers. I think Zay Flowers is a really, really good football player. The problem to me is he's a 5'9" guy. He does make a ton of plays. I don't know if the Cowboys will particularly draft a 5'9" wide receiver. We'll see how that goes. I mean, there's some guys in this draft that are challenged with their height, but he is a hell of a football player. Him and Parker Washington from Penn State are two guys that are kind of challenged. Downs from North Carolina is like a 5'10" guy. So yeah, there's several of them that are height-wise challenged, but really good players.
Pick 30 to the Philadelphia Eagles, Kansas State edge, Felix Anudike-Uzomah.
Yeah, this guy, I got in a discussion about with Dane Burglar about this one. I feel like this guy's a better player than what we have with White from Georgia Tech. I think this guy he's got super get off. I think he can capture the edge. I think he can dip. I think he can finish. He chases the ball. He's got explosive traits to him. If you gave me a choice between him and White, I think I would take the kid from Kansas State.
And then pick 31, I believe, I could be wrong here, but I believe this is one of the guys that you like at edge. Pick 31, the Kansas City Chiefs select Georgia edge, Nolan Smith.
See, now we're talking. I mean, if you're the Cowboys, I would take Nolan Smith above all those guys that we just ran through. Anybody that's behind White, who they selected, give me Nolan Smith at 26 over White and my Kansas State guy. Now, Mayer, the tight end, is a tough one because I got a first-round grade on him. That would be a little bit of a hard one. But if the Cowboys were looking, if White, in fact, was going to be their pick because they were looking for an edge, well, then they need to take Nolan Smith. And I think Nolan Smith is a hell of a football player.
Yeah, and I think Nolan Smith, the good thing about him, which I got a chance to watch him a little bit closer this week, I think the thing I like about Nolan Smith is there's a completeness to his game. Like he's not just this, pin your ears back and fire off and rush the quarterback. I mean, Nolan Smith is, I think, still actually developing as a pass rusher, still into his own. But I think he's really good against the run. I think he punches way outside his weight class. He's a thin 6'3", 235. But he'll get in there and he'll play tough with some 300-pound players, and he'll get his victories there. I like Nolan Smith quite a bit. I don't know that the only question here I have, Brian, is whether or not edge is really the right pick for the Cowboys, regardless. Whether it's Nolan Smith or Keon White or whoever, I just feel like, man, you were able to get pushed from your pass rush. I know the second half of the season wasn't great, but you were able to get pushed from your pass rush. You're able to do a lot of different things. I just feel like wide receiver and corner are going to be issues that are going to be much more pressing to you in the draft.
Can you give me the corners that were taken in this draft? I assume Porter from Penn State, Gonzalez.
I'll go down the list. I think you're going to be surprised. Number one corner off the board to Philly at 10 was Devin Witherspoon from Illinois.
Great player. First round player on my board.
14 to the Patriots, Christian Gonzalez from Oregon.
Okay, that's another first-round grade. I have him as the second best corner on my board.
16, this one would hurt, to the Washington Commanders, Joey Porter Jr., Penn State.
There you go. Now you wipe me out of the corners. I've got Porter, Gonzalez, Witherspoon as my first-round corners in that order. So you've wiped me out now. Banks would be the next guy. He went to Minnesota at 23, right?
Yes, sir.
So now we're talking about, if you're a Dallas Cowboy on Brian Broaddus's board, you're looking at Ringo from Georgia, Forbes from Mississippi State, Cam Smith from South Carolina. Those would be the next guys that I would look at on my board. Man, the Banks one hurts me. I have no expectations of getting Porter, Gonzalez, or Witherspoon when I'm sitting here, at 26 for the Dallas Cowboys. I did have some hope that I could get Banks there at 26 would be. Now, if Banks being gone, I mentioned Nolan Smith would be my rusher. You mentioned Mayer would be involved in there as well, the tight end of the guys you mentioned. And then Torrance, the guard from Florida, would be a guy that I mentioned as well.
Now, when we look at the receiver position, the guys that are off the board there, you lost Jordan Addison at 12 to the Texans.
Makes a lot of sense. A perfect weapon for them.
You then lost Jackson Smith and Jigba at 20 to Seattle.
Makes a lot of sense too. Good.
Quentin Johnston. Okay. Quentin Johnston from TCU at 21.
Okay. And
then you lose Jalen Hyatt at pick 25 to the Giants.
Okay, there's starting to be a run now on these wide receivers. Now I've lost, like you said, I've lost Addison, Hyatt, Johnston, Smith, and Jigba. Now I'm down to Downs, and I've got Boutte in my board for me, and it's not an LSU thing. I think this kid is legitimate talent. I mean, I know people are probably going to ding him for some of the off the field stuff. I really do like the kid Scott from Cincinnati. And then you get into the Flowers, Tillman, Washington, Rice, and Perry. I get into those guys. So you've wiped me out in the first round at wide receiver. My higher grades might be at corner, and it might be at tight end, and it will be at defensive end. Those are where my board would like benefit the Cowboys: tight end, defensive end, and maybe the cornerback spot.
Pick 15, Utah tight end Dalton Kincaid goes to the Packers in this mock draft.
Wow.
So if you see a run on receivers, like you've seen here, and you've got the ability to go get, potentially you could get Mayer from Notre Dame there if you wanted, or might be too early for some people, but if you wanted to get Musgrave from Oregon, you could.
It wouldn't be too early for me, Bobby, because Mayer's my number one tight end in the first round. Then on my board, I've got Musgrave, Oregon State, Washington from Georgia next behind him, and then Kincaid. All those three, Musgrave, Washington, Kincaid, all in the third round. Or excuse me, second round, those three names.
So if you're looking at a run on receivers and you're getting any sort of a drop, or the Cowboys aren't going to take a Zay Flowers, if that's the way the board broke, would you be against them taking a tight end there to help the passing attack and say, let's get Musgrave, let's do something like that?
Not if there's a couple of spots there, like I mentioned, they could help themselves with Torrance if they wanted to at guard. Nolan Smith would be outstanding to me. Benton from Wisconsin would be a guy that I would consider if you're looking at three technique. Like a one technique guy. Simpson, the linebacker from Clemson. Branch, the safety from Alabama. And then Johnson, the strong safety from Texas A&M. Those are all guys that I would kind of look at that 20. I think the draft will stretch for you better at corner than it will at wide receiver. But the tight end, you could grab a first-round tight end if you take Mayer.
You're listening to the Love of the Star podcast. The Love of the Star is an Odyssey podcast. You can find it on the Odyssey app or wherever you get your podcasts. All right, Brian, let's dive into the Dean Julia Love of the Star mailbag and see what questions the listeners have for us today. First question here from Stacy. She goes, what are your thoughts, and this ties in the draft, so what are your thoughts on the report about the intrigue of CJ Stroud? I will say this first. I think they have intrigue in every player that they have a first-round grade on every year. I think they had intrigue on Dalvin Cook when he was a first-round grade for them, but they weren't going to take Dalvin Cook, even though he was staring there at him. They took Taco Charlton. So intrigue and that actually adding up to somehow impacting what the Cowboys do at the quarterback position are two very different things to me. So do I think they like CJ Stroud? Yeah, I think they like CJ Stroud like much of the league does. Do I think that it has any relevance to what the Cowboys do at the quarterback position next year or into the future? No, I do not.
Yeah. And again, Stacy, thanks for the question. Thanks for always the loyal follow. You put out some good stuff too. I kind of feel like that you hit the you hit the nail on the head. I think we're getting to a point where once you set your board, and they are far from doing that. A lot of teams are working on that right now, and they're getting ready for the combine. And then once they get to the combine, they're going to get all the medicals. They're going to get all the workout information that they need, the numbers and stuff to kind of put where the skill guys where they need to be, because you got times on them now. You got official times. You can kind of look at your defensive lineman, your offensive lineman. I think the time for where CJ Stroud sits on their board. Now, if the report is, I talked to a scout who covers the Midwest and he really likes CJ Stroud, I would say, okay, that's cool. But to say, I think the Cowboys, are they going to like CJ Stroud? Sure. Are they going to have a chance to get CJ Stroud? Likely, probably not.
No, and I think, like you say there, I know that like in the past, they liked Zach Wilson. They liked Trevor Lawrence. That didn't matter, though. Those were not guys that they were going
to. I'm sorry, go ahead. But
no, that was it.
If that report said, hey, they like Hendon Hooker from Tennessee, now you got my attention. Now you got my attention. More. That matters more to me, because I'm thinking now, okay, if they like, those quarterbacks are all going to be gone. Young from Alabama is going to be gone. Stroud from Ohio State is going to be gone. Will Levis from Kentucky is probably going to be gone. If now you're looking about, okay, well, who's the next best quarterback? On the Brian Broaddus board, it's Hooker from Tennessee. Now, Hooker's in a situation where he hurt his knee in the South Carolina game. So is this a redshirt situation where he's not going to play at all for you? That kind of thing. But do you draft him just because you have compensatory fours and other things to kind of work with? But if the report was they like Hendon Hooker, now you got my attention more so than Stroud. Sure, we all like Stroud.
Question here from John. A free agent signing always unlikely with this team, but do you see any scenario where they move their first-round pick for an established veteran?
That's a great question, because you're looking at, if you were looking at wide receivers, the big whispers were, would they find a way to go get Diggs? I think it would take, I guarantee you, Bobby, when we got down to 26 in that previous segment, when we were talking about who the Cowboys were taking, all those receivers were gone, all the first round receivers were gone. And then it turns into guys that are kind of second round guys. Mm-hmm. Then it turns into like, okay, well, if I go give up 26 to go get an established guy that's better than anybody that's left on that board, that makes good football sense to me. Will they do it? I don't know. I mean, the one thing they have a history of doing is moving a first round pick for a wide receiver. They have a history of doing that. Anything else? We'll kind of see. I was interested, with free agency, I was trying to think of a way to get that defensive tackle from the Commanders.
Daron Payne.
Yeah, but the more, we had Todd Archer on our show yesterday, for ESPN, and Todd was like, I'm like, hey, is it a pipe dream to try and get a Daron Payne? And Todd's like, I just don't see them paying a defensive tackle $20 million a year. Just don't do it. So I had dreams about going out and getting a guy like that, getting an impact player. But, never say never with Jerry, but I just don't think it's likely unless it's something, like I say, that receiver that makes sense for him.
Next question here from Artemio. Does Deron Bland keep his spot over Jordan Lewis? Now, I think you got to ask a couple of different questions here. Anthony Brown is out of contract. Jordan Lewis has a year left on his contract. They can free up $4.5 million by releasing him. But do you feel good enough about the contingencies behind him? And is Deron Bland even taking Jordan Lewis's spot? Is that the question? He played there because Jordan Lewis was out because he got hurt. But it may be a case where the Cowboys view it as, no, he's playing the outside. He is going to be one of our outside corners. We don't look at him as a nickel, so that spot is still Jordan Lewis's. Brian, how do you view Deron Bland's future here in terms of where he best fits, and how might that play with Jordan Lewis, do you think?
You told me I could save $4 million moving on from Jordan Lewis.
Mm-hmm.
I like Jordan Lewis, I really do, but I'm looking at math right now, and math tells me I could save $4 million on a position where I have a guy that throughout the year looked like that he was fine with his growth. He could play outside, he could play inside. I could play him in a couple of different spots. He looks comfortable doing that. He's around the ball, he finishes. I mean, if I could save $4 million for something else, again, I love you, Jordan Lewis, but I've got to make this call, and I'm gonna play Deron Bland, and I'm probably going to draft another corner that could probably play on the outside in this draft.
Question here from at AT Gans. When do you see them filling out their coaching staff? Seems to be taking a while. Brian, we're still waiting for word on quarterback coach. I think the quarterback coach is in the building. I think it's Scott Tolzien. So I think
it's Tolzien too. Yeah.
I don't think that's anything that necessarily takes a rush. They still need to fill running backs coach. Obviously, they did fill with, we talked about Will Harriger, but they also filled with, Sharif Floyd and Darian Thompson. Former players are now being added to staff. But really, running backs coach is the one I think that they have left to fill. I think you've referenced before, maybe they have somebody in mind that, things are just taking a little bit to play out. But in general, wouldn't you want to have that firmed up? Who's your running backs coach before you guys go to Indy next week?
Yeah, it might be a possibility too, where they're meeting the guys at Indy. I just saw where Skip Pete took a job with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So, he's kind of if you want to say, a little bit of a late hire for the Buccaneers. I do think, to me, running back coach is an important position, but it's not as important as offensive line. It's not as important as the quarterback coach. They got those. I mean, the quarterback coach we talked about, but I do think you're right about Tolzien being that guy. The running back coach, I think they could kind of be a little bit more patient on right now. I don't think now it could be a pressing issue when they get to the point about having to evaluate what they're going to do with Zeke and what they're going to do with Pollard.
Last question here from Kyle, just because I don't believe this. I've never heard of this as being a problem, but I figured I'd toss it over to you with all your vast NFL experience. Brian, Kyle says, please answer this question I've been curious about for a long time. Do you think long sleeves inhibit a quarterback's play?
That's a great question, because I know I got killed for talking about when Zeke had a fumble problem and he was wearing the long sleeves. And I'm like, he needs to take the long sleeves off. And everybody's like, oh, it doesn't matter, all this, that. What'd he do? He took the long sleeves off and he stopped fumbling the ball, And so that's, to me, I've every experience I've ever had, bad weather players in Green Bay, long sleeves, carrying the ball, holding the ball, gets slippery, ball gets on the sleeve, that gets slippery. It's an interesting thing to talk about when you say quarterbacks, because traditionally we don't see the quarterbacks wearing sleeves until it gets more or less the middle of the year. Maybe you get those outdoor games. I remember for a while there, the problem that Dak had that I felt bad about for him, when he was a bigger guy, he sweated so much. You remember, and now you worry about Dak. Okay, I don't see that sweaty kind of guy playing. I mean, you can look at his uniform in some of those early season games, and he's just like drenched. And you're wondering, is his hand, is it a problem? He's wearing the sleeves now. Is the sweat getting on the sleeve? Is it rolling down into the palm of his hand? Those are, they wear sweatbands and stuff like that. But I'm trying to think of the great quarterbacks that have always worn sleeves. And
didn't Favre wear sleeves?
He only wore sleeves when it got to like November, December. Like Rodgers is the same way. Rodgers plays short sleeve. Mahomes is a one sleeve guy, but his long sleeve is on his left arm, and he's open or bare arm on the right arm, I believe. Right. Jalen Hurts in the game. Jalen Hurts will wear long sleeves. He wore them in the championship game. In the Super Bowl, he didn't wear them. So I think quarterbacks, I think it's just comfort. I think it's just a psychological. But Dak initially was not a long sleeve guy. Like, there were games that he played in cold weather where he didn't wear sleeves.
Right.
And some quarterbacks are like that. Some quarterbacks are just fine with just, playing with, bare arms in poor conditions and being okay about it. But it's a good question. Really is.
That does it for us here today on the Love of the Star podcast. We'll be back with you guys again on Friday with more Cowboys talk. If you guys have anything you want us to touch on, be sure to reach out to us on Twitter at Brian Broaddus, at BobbyBeltTX, and we'll try to get to it over the course of the next few weeks. Until next time, we'll talk to you guys later.